First aid, the beginning. There's many different names for this section. Some people call it the roles and responsibilities section. Some different organizations call it the intro. Some call it, they just roll it into emergency scene management sometimes. They call it a bunch of things. This is the beginning, the initial stuff you need to know about first aid. Okay, first thing, what is first aid? What are we even talking about? There is a longer definition for first aid that has a few different components. The easy version is the stuff you do in the first 10 minutes before the ambulance gets there, pretty much. So someone's in a medical emergency and you're helping them. What are the stuff you need to do before medical help or people that get them to medical help are there to relieve you? That's basically the first aid stuff. The longer definition involves something around a medical emergency, something around you providing medical help, and then something around readily available materials. The longer definition for first aid would be emergency help given to a suddenly ill or injured person with readily available materials. Just focus on the stuff you do in the first 10 minutes. That's pretty much it. Think about it that way, and this isn't that complicated. You don't need to remember that definition. Some first aid tests might make you, but whatever. Don't worry about it. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. Who can do first aid? Anybody. Anybody can do this, okay? You don't need a license to perform first aid in general. There's a separation between medically controlled acts and between the medically non-controlled acts. Why am I talking about this? A medically controlled act is a thing that many countries, Canada included, will separate from the rest and say, this is only for doctors, or for nurses, or for medical professionals, because they think that these acts are generally they're too dangerous to do without having very, very significant training. The first aid stuff is the stuff that you might need a bit of training for, but generally speaking, anybody can do it. So they say, you know what, this stuff, go ahead. It's still a medical act, but it's not controlled. So you can go ahead. Some countries will make the distinction and say that it's medical and non-medical, but whatever. The basic point, stuff doctors do, stuff doctors don't do. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we can do, and anybody can do it. There's a lot of first aid that can be done where a 7-year-old child can help their parent. Perfectly valid, no problem. Here's a great example. A parent is having an asthma attack and the child knows where their inhaler is. The parent starts having breathing difficulties and the child knows that their parent has that inhaler and they notice it, and then the parent signals like for something and the child grabs them and hands them their inhaler. Congratulations, the 7-year-old did first aid. Doesn't have to be complicated, okay? So just keep in mind, anybody can do this. You don't necessarily need training to do this. You might want training and a license to do this in a workplace, but that's more of a labor liability concern and less of a whether or not you can do it concern. You can do it. Okay. If you want to know more about medical help, it's probably in a law. If you're in Ontario, you're looking for the RHPA, Registered Health Professionals Act, Section 27, subsection 5, that lists specifically in the Registered Health Professionals Act, the Controlled Act Section 5 lists every single thing that is a controlled act in point form. So if you want to list, if you're in Ontario, for example, and you want a list telling you what's a controlled act, there's literally a list in the law. That's if you're interested. Wouldn't worry about too much about that otherwise. Okay. Once we've talked about that, then one of the next things that will often come up in a first aid course is this idea of consent. And consent should be talked about really, really early. Consent is different depending on where you are. If you are in Canada, you have two types of consent, essentially. You have two. The first is you have conscious consent. So some form of, while they're awake and able to talk to you and give you verbal consent, conscious verbal, hey, can I insert action? Yes, sure, you may insert action. Verbal consent. The second is something called implied consent. Now, here's the way implied consent works. If you go to someone who is having an exceptionally bad day and they are completely out, so they're not asleep, but they're unconscious. The way this would normally work is, you'd walk into a room, you'd see someone on the floor or someone in great distress, usually on the floor because they're unconscious in this example. You walk in, they're on the floor, and you say, hey, I know first aid, can I help you? Or some sort of, hey, how you doing? And then nothing, right? Absolutely nothing. You then would ideally, in a first aid situation, go in and tap their shoulders or say, hey, how are you okay? Do a responsiveness check. I'll show you how to do that later, but you do a responsiveness check. Now, you're touching someone in this situation. The touching of an individual is potentially violating a legal boundary here and invading somebody's personal space. You've done it because you've asked for consent in some way, or you've tried to say, hey, are you okay? And the context has necessitated this. The event that is happening has made it so this must happen. Because how are you going to check if they're sleeping or dying if you don't touch them? And like, it's the shoulders, come on. So you do that and then you get nothing. The person is dead weight. You then, in Canada and in other countries, some countries around the world, have what's known as implied consent. You are able to do whatever is necessary within reason, and within reason is defined differently everywhere, but sort of basically within the boundaries of anything we're teaching you in these videos tends to pretty much be what it is. Basically anything within reason, that's not a medically controlled act, to assist them in not dying. This could mean, if they're having a heart attack, for example, the complete removal of clothes on a woman. This could mean the complete removal of bras and anything underneath for a bearing of the chest because of conductive underwiring, because you may be taking out a defibrillator and putting pads on, clear shock, right? Like, these things could occur. This could mean any number of things, but you're given the implied consent to do that because if you don't, the understanding is they probably die. So that's the idea here, okay? So once again, that's implied consent. Conscious consent, completely different. Hey, I know first aid, can I help you? Yes, no. This is a binary question. You either have consent or you don't. Very simple. If they say no, you don't then have implied consent. So you don't just, but your life is in danger. Well, I said no, but your life is in danger. Well, I said no. Well, okay, I'll just watch, right? you don't have the allowance to grab them, etc. However, few things. One, if that person who said no goes unresponsive, you then, in Canada and many other jurisdictions, have implied consent anyways. The reason that's given for this, and this is the reason that I've always heard, this is the reason that has been said by every instructor I've ever met. This has been consistent throughout the board. So I know for some of you how this is going to sound. It might be because of differences in laws in your area. I get it. The understanding that it has always been in this industry is that had they known how bad their situation was before they went unresponsive, they would have given you consent. So when they go unresponsive, you have implied consent. Now, here's the thing. They denied you conscious consent, denied it while they were awake, or you just didn't get it. So if you successfully resuscitate a person where you had implied consent, that doesn't mean that you now have it when they're awake. So you need to back off and go, so you were just resuscitated. You had this. As far as we know, am I good to continue helping you? Right? Back off. You don't have conscious consent, okay? So just keep in mind they're separated. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, while they're still conscious, if they've rejected your offer to assist, you have been told that you cannot touch them. You are not legally restricted from not helping them. What does that look like? If someone is having a serious emergency and they need an emergency call, so they need, in Canada, it would be 911, but the number that you would call to alert police and fire and paramedics or medical services, that sort of number. They're not denying your ability to use your phone. So if you feel that it's necessary to call emergency services, even though they've denied consent to you, you can call emergency services. In fact, in some areas, providing first aid at a minimum is considered calling 911 for Canada and waiting for help to arrive. You don't have to touch anybody to call 911 and wait for help to arrive. You can just do it. So just keep in mind, at a minimum, with consent, you can still do this stuff. Now, why am I going on and on and on about consent all the time? Many people are concerned with getting sued. Many people, and I've heard this for years in first aid courses, it happens in more than half the courses. We have a standard thing where we say, anybody have any questions? Or, so we've just gone over this stuff. What are our thoughts about it? Stuff like that. We'll go over that. And then people will bring up, I don't want to get sued. I don't want to get sued. I don't want to catch something. I don't want to, etc. Okay. It's important to understand in where you are, what sort of the limits of that are, and what's protecting you or might not be protecting you. In first aid in Canada, and in many countries around the world, we have something called Good Samaritan legislation, or the Good Samaritan Law. The way Good Samaritan legislation works is, if you perform first aid, if you do something that's in the interest of helping the person, and then they attempt to sue you for whatever reason. So an example would be, someone has a head or a spinal injury, so they fall off a ladder or something, and their neck or their spine is kind of injured, and you need to physically move them because something is going to fall on them, or they're bleeding massively and you have to move them a bit to bandage the bleed or something. And in doing so, in moving them, they become paralyzed. Okay. But it was necessary to save their life. Good Samaritan legislation is there to protect the first aider from prosecution or from successful prosecution. So these laws exist so that you can feel safe legally in just doing what you need to do to help the person. So you don't have to think every time you're about to do something, you don't have to second guess, am I legally okay? It's just like, no, help the person, get on it, they're dying, you figure it out, let's go, right? So these things sort of exist, but they don't exist everywhere. So if you're watching this and you're in a country where they don't have Good Samaritan laws, maybe look into how to navigate the situation. Because look, I don't want anybody going to jail because they tried to save somebody's life. That's not good. And personally, not to tell people how to run their countries, I think having laws that make it so the public can feel comfortable doing things that your country has decided are safe, helping someone out medical practices, having laws that protect people in those circumstances are generally a good idea. But look, I've taught this stuff for years. I'm biased, fair enough. We talked a bit about the person denying you consent. This feeds into another legal concern people have, which is being charged for negligence. Now, negligence is basically performing something, an action, doing something where you ought to have known better, and the doing of the wrong thing resulted in bad happening. So an example would be, you were taught first aid, especially if you were licensed, for example, and you were taught to do a specific thing, and then you just started doing something completely out there that made no sense whatsoever and started hurting people. So someone had, for example, the head or spinal injury, and there's no hazard around, they're not bleeding, and you decide to just pick them up and flap them around like a fish you got in the supermarket. Okay? First of all, you'd be pretty strong if they're like the same weight as you to do that. But still, what's the point? Why are we flinging people around? Right? That would be negligent. Now, look, I'm doing CPR and I break some ribs. It happens, okay? That's not negligence. I do CPR with a hammer. Okay, that's negligent. Like, what are you doing? Okay, so it exists, but there is a technical thing in negligence in Canada and in some other places around the world called abandonment. Now, once you say, I know first aid, can I help you? You're locked in. You're now helping, okay? If they deny your help, you're still helping. You're there. So I need to explain this out. This is going to be a bit of a story time, but it'll probably help you understand the importance of this and why this exists with story time. Okay. Person is injured. I know first aid, can I help you? From that point forward, this person is supposed to be receiving medical help or something approximating it from the point those words are said until they're discharged from a hospital. They're supposed to have continuous medical care. Now, there's different ways this can happen, but ideally, from the point that the first aider says this, if the first aider, for whatever reason, needs to leave, another first aider or a paramedic or whatever is supposed to take over for them so there's no break in care. There's no break in assistance. What generally happens is first aider helps the person until the paramedic relieves them. Paramedic helps the person until they get to a hospital, where a nurse will generally relieve them. The nurse helps the person in the hospital with a team, taking turns, essentially relieving each other, monitoring until doctors get involved, etc. When you're in the hospital, even though there isn't necessarily a healthcare provider right at your bedside, there's usually somebody else working in the hospital that's monitoring a group of people, effectively doing sort of like multiple casualty assistance or management, which we'll talk about after. Or they have like a button that you can press saying, emergency, get me now, but you're in an environment where people are monitoring you. That's ideally what happens, okay? You don't want a breakdown in that continued care. So because of that, this abandonment sort of principle exists, and some laws in some countries exist around this and negligence. So once you say, I know first aid, can I help you? You've started, I call it like the medical chain of custody, kind of like the way a chain of custody works with evidence in policing. It's like it's like a chain of help, I guess, but like I think about it like as a medical analogous to a chain of custody. It's the same kind of principle, I guess. Yeah, so once you started it, you're locked in, you help. Now, if you abandon somebody, so you say, I know first aid, can I help you? And then they say, sure, and then you just walk off for no reason, it can be argued that criminal negligence is occurring and this can be a problem. So look, you decide you're taking charge and you're doing this. You're taking charge and you're doing this. We're going, okay? This doesn't mean you have to do everything, but at minimum, that wait for call 911 or call emergency number, wait for help to arrive, that's your minimum, okay? You say the magic words, that's your minimum. There are situations where you can cease helping directly and it's okay though. So, one, the person, you say, I know first aid, can I help you? And you find out nothing's actually wrong. You don't have to follow them home, okay? Nothing's actually wrong, you're good. Okay, so you know, I know first aid, can I help you? Why? What's wrong with me? Oh, I thought you were you look kind of pale. I thought you were... Really? What's wrong? Oh, whatever, okay, fair enough. Okay, they're competitive, they're a bit pale today, they get mad. Okay, fine. You know, you are bleeding. Are you sure? Yeah, it's Halloween, this is a prop. Fair enough, okay, right? You know, whatever, okay? So, you know, whatever, for whatever reason, there's no emergency, got it, no problem. Now, look, in that example, it wasn't a prop, they were bleeding. Let's say that, you know, they're lying and then suddenly they go really pale, they go into shock and then they pass out. You know, ambulance time, here we go. But still, the point is that the emergency can end for whatever reason. Okay, there's another situation. You're in the middle of no cell reception land, whatever that is. You want to call for help and you can't. And you got to go somewhere different to call for help and you can't take the casualty with you for whatever reason. No problem. You're not abandoning people. You're just going to a location to call for help, to direct them to the casualty, patient, injured person, whatever magic word you want to use. Okay? So that's another reason you can do it. You can just not be with the casualty at that time. Here's another. It's dangerous for you. Look, if I walk into a building and there's 10 people on the floor, I'm leaving the building because I think it's a gas leak. I just go, there's something in the air. I'm going to open air because I don't want to be the 11th person on the floor. That's going to be my initial impulse. Or I'll make sure I come back in with like a suit with a funny mask or something where it's contained within and I don't have to go be the 11th person on the floor, right? Whatever. The point is, if there's a hazard nearby, if there's something that's endangering you, okay, you're not there, no problem. You're still calling for help, etc. You're not abandoning, no issue. Oh, technically, the casualty themselves could be the hazard. So you could be dealing with a drug overdose. This can happen with a few other conditions. A casualty can become what's known as combative. They'll get very angry. Just when you get really uncomfortable from blood loss or shock or whatever, casualties can get really agitated. It can happen. So in that case, they could be dangerous to you. If that happens, then back off, safe distance, make sure you're safe. You can still call paramedics and probably police to help, but it's not safe for you. You're not expected to like sit there and bandage while being punched like this. That's ridiculous. So that can be the other reason that you would, you know, okay, you stay there. Yeah. So they're violent, but like I might need someone to help restrain them because they're having an exceptionally bad day. No, no, no. There's no weapons, but it's just, very erratic casualty. Right? Who knows? Whatever sort of phrasing you want to use.